Hello everyone and welcome to another Third Age Reforged. Today we have a 3v3 battle submitted by the community. My name is Cadden Fodder and I hope you've got your snacks ready as we sort of start and kick things off. Let's start on slow speed. Right, we're just gonna have a quick check across the armies as we zoom over. You can see here actually that two of the forces have decided to join together, and one of them is a little bit further over just due to the placement and how they start. I think on one side we have all Rune, which is seemingly a favourite for these videos. But we'll start off first with Rules, who's playing the Free Peoples of Eredor. Again, an army faction that we didn't normally see very much of, but since of late seen quite a few times in multiple places. So we've got some bandits who are currently hidden, probably a little bit of fodder waiting to do an ambush. We got some footmen, spearmen, some militia, quite a few militia actually, some royal guard that's going to reinforce them, a number of gatekeepers. If you guys haven't seen these from previous videos, they are crossbow units with a large giant glaive on the back, relatively good armor. They're pretty standard unit of late. They're expensive, which is why you see the more the militia, but they're really good for what they are. Battle ready dinner time, again, you can't fail to have these with you. Knights of Numinous and some bodyguards. Knights of Numinous, again, you really need to use archers to take these guys out. They can wipe out armies if they're left to do their own business. Backed up by Arnor, so we've got some men-at-arms. They cost slightly more than the standard men-at-arms unit, but they're definitely worth their money. Some more battle-ready Dynadine here supporting them. We've got some Dynadine Wardens, which are great for holding the line. Some men-at-arms standard units. Looks like we've got some archers at the front putting down spikes. We're supported behind with some more men-at-arms. A huge number of them with Dynadine Rangers. We have 2 units of catapults here. What I would say is they're a little bit boxy. Hopefully, yeah, they've boxed up a little bit here, a bit new boxy. So hopefully they'll move out from that to give us an entertaining battle. As we move over now to take a look at Rohan, which is forced on the far side. We've got a number of Humingas, supported by sort of unit of axemans and spearmen, more axemen, a variety of different sort of these heavy sort of shock troops, dismounted royal guard. So for you that haven't seen them dismounted, there they are. Nice little spears in the hand. Catapult of their own, some marshals of the red, which I think are relatively standard now in most Rohan armies. You've really got to take them with you to make the most of your compositions. Royal lords, royal guard, and another royal guard unit. We've got some shield maidens at the back. Again, for people who haven't seen shield maidens before, the beerless ladies of Rohan, which have been added for this mod. I'm going to quickly zoom over now and work over the Rune forces. I don't think these will take very long, as I imagine they're relatively similar with one another. We've got some nomadic warriors in the front line and some light infantry. We've got some wind riders for some fast cav. Brotherhood of the Axe, fantastic army, and with them inside them. You can see them there with these sort of two-bladed and the black and red armor we've got. We've got some missile units. We've got some tribesmen. Some more sort of standard the Golden Army archers. We've got Brotherhood and Axe on the other flank as well. Clan crossbowmen as well to support them for some armor piercing. And we've got some heavy infantry. Dragon's Wrath and a catapult to finish it off with the Brotherhood of the Lance at the back. So, as much as Rune has an okay cavalry sort of force with 2 Wind Riders and the Lance unit here, I think they'll struggle against Rohans. What's really going to save them is if they can get these crossbows and javelins working. They don't actually have any spikes down, which could leave them open to Rohan's attacks. Moving over now to the next force. Again, we got some raiders here for some Brotherhood of the Lance, bodyguard, Dragon's Wrath, some heavy infantry, some more axemen, good number of javies, and a number of bowmen. Again, these are sort of, they look pretty much fitting for the part with their sort of heavy armoured bowmen, very good for a good skirmish phase. A catapult of their own, which is already beginning to fire. Some more wind riders. As we move over to the final force, we got some cataphax even, some melee warders, heavy infantry, spearmen, clan warriors, some missile units already firing, spearmen. Again, these are all pretty standard. We've got some clan guard on the side, which I think we haven't seen for a while. So we'll just zoom in on these guys. You can see them here with their large sort of two-handed weapons. Yeah, pretty standard. The interesting, and they've got some of their Wind Riders of their own. So the interesting thing is that Rune definitely has more cavalry, but whether it will pay off for them, I don't know. It's quite difficult, I think, to puncture into this area. We've got spears on the side, we've got spikes in the front. We've got 2 catapults, and obviously we've got the knights and bodyguards. So we'll just see how this battle goes as we kick it off. It's definitely, I think, going to have to be Rune that'll go on the offensive, as I'm not quite sure how long of a skirmish phase they'll be able to do. As Rohan start moving forward, but you can see here already the Wind Riders going out to try and do some early attacks. Possibly they've seen, as you can see here, that the Royal Guard have to charge through their own... Yeah, it's the Helmingers that were out of formation at the front lines, and there's a good charge in, but they are getting swamped around now by the Royal Guard, but they're bringing their own Wind Riders to come in support. So they're going to try and take out some of these archers early on. You can see there's this devastation there from the charge. He needs to get these Wind Riders out of here, though. They will die if they're in prolonged melee. You can see them dropping extremely quickly to this heavy cavalry. They need to keep them moving. They need to get them away from there. So you can see now that Rune is sending over some more riders to support their ally with Wind Riders. These guys need to again do the same thing that happened before and attack these Helmingers on the move, and this catapult, which will be slow to reposition itself. For those that saw the 3v3, which had the elves that tried to go and join their ally, they got attacked and harassed all the way along the route by Cav. But actually what he's done is he's gone and charged the Royal Guard again. He's got a much faster unit. There you go. You should really start moving them, keep them on the move, get them out of there, and actually you can see that the other Rohan player, he lost, the other Rune player lost both of his Wind Riders early on because he just didn't get them out of the battle. As soon as he'd made that charge, they needed to leave. They need to keep harassing this force. It was that while they're on the move, it was a perfect opportunity to try and take them out before they got there. And taking out that catapult would have been perfect because it meant that these guys are going to box up. They could have had a great opportunity to continue to pound and use the skirmish. But now that Rohan has been able to ward off the multiple units of Cav, he can just now walk these guys in really now, because there's not enough of a threat anymore, because they've lost 2 units of cavalry cheaply. It was a great early charge, really great use of timing to see the Helmingers out of place and the fact they were moving them over. But because they literally lost so many of their force, the smaller number of Cav are now able to basically ward off Runes, and Rune isn't going to be able to get a look in now. They're not going to be able to make the attack. They're not going to be able to punch this through, and this new box now is going to form itself up effectively and kind of hold out. Now Guru-chan is has no problems or issues with new boxes. I personally find them dull, uninspiring, and tactically the way they're designed is perhaps, in my opinion, a little bit poor, but they aren't unbeatable. New boxes are designed to be quite rigid and difficult to engage because of how they are. However, what you can do is reposition and move yourself, and it's quite hard. It's a lot harder for the box to then reposition. He's left his Brotherhood of the Lance out of formation here. They've been charged by a number of bodyguards supported by bandits. He's come in with his Wind Riders, but more bandits are coming over as fodder. Now the bandits are really just to try and lock down some of the faster units so that his slower units can then catch up. He doesn't mind if these guys die, if they keep them busy, and there you can go. So the Wind Riders, the Brotherhood of the Lance, caught up with the bandits, and now they're going to get charged down in prolonged melee with the knights, and those knights will remove them off the field. Again, Rune really needed to try and keep his cavalry alive as long as possible and almost not engage the opposition's cavalry, because the heavy cavalry is so much superior to theirs. They really needed to keep themselves out of the way and almost ignore their cav to try and remove their skirmish line. You can see here again his Wind Riders caught out of position, charging some cheap bandits. Okay, they got a good number of kills in the charge, but I mean they're bandits, they're cheap, and what he's doing is he's losing a very valuable cav force, and they just can't afford to do so. As I was saying, you can reposition around the box, but the box struggles to reposition around you. The other thing is that the more the box gets tightened, the more that you can use your ranged units and catapults and siege weaponry against them, but they will probably look to reform and reposition themselves. The problem is that they aren't short of skirmish units themselves, and they'll probably hold out for some time, especially with the shield wall formations they can build with so many infantry that Arnor took with them. In the meantime, again, Rune is continuing to try and, I suppose, kill these bandits with vengeance. However, in the meantime, I think they're losing too many of their cavalry to make it worth it. But you can see the beginnings now of the infantry assault, which is why you saw the um, archers move back behind these guards. The militia probably won't hold out for too much longer, but the Royal Guard will be there for some time, supported by the gatekeepers who will be firing in, and the spearmen that are going to come in to join them. I do think that this is probably the better side to attack, as much as the gatekeepers are a very strong, powerful unit. The militia is where I would see the weak point, and this is the best point, I think, to hit in. As you can see, the fiery balls of death starting to try and make work hitting against some of this artillery. I think that Arnor is probably the most difficult to attack, especially now that Rohan has come over to resupport them with the Helmingers, which you can see are now joining in the front line, supported by the men-at-arms in shield wall formation. Their best bet is probably, yeah, as they're doing, skirmish this area as best they can at range, make the main assault over here with the militia, and hope the catapults, the dual catapults, don't take them out. He is getting a couple of rear charges in with what's remaining of his wind riders, but I think there's just too few now to make the most of it as we hear the fiery death coming in. Looks like they are using standard shot, which is why we're not being able to see it. You can see there that one of the catapults has gone from the standard shot attack, which is more accurate, but slightly less in terms of ranged damage, and they just missed the front of this line here. I think the problem is now that they've got so few cav left, they can't really get those charges going, because there is a large gap open here, which is open to sort of vulnerable units, but they just can't exploit that anymore. And I think unfortunately what's going to happen is that Rohan, because they can really kind of lead these guys to auto fire themselves, they can almost entirely focus on their few units of cavalry and have them charge. Rune, really, I think their advantage will be now is probably have to slow the battle down a little bit, try and reform themselves, try and reposition themselves. They're a little bit spread out from one another as allies go, and they need to really take their time, as they may get... No, I thought they were going to get rear charged, but they stopped. As the heavy infantry turns around to try and face them and soak up a charge from the knights, as the bandits come in to try and support from a melee point of view, just additional bodies here. They do have spearmen. I think what they'll have to do is reform their spearmen to try and protect them, but the more spearmen they use who can't fight because they're protecting the infantry, is more open their skirmishers become in the back lines. As you can see, the knights kind of charging around looking for good targets. As, again, Rules doesn't really need to look at his front lines. I mean, they'll hold or they'll not hold. He's not going to be repositioning them very much for the most part. Again, sorry, you can hear the catapult shots but not really see them. They're just using standard shot, which makes them really sort of difficult from a viewing point of view, as the knights continue to look for targets to make the attack. And I'm probably going to start heading over here where two of the Rune forces have positioned themselves. You can see one of them is coming over the hill now to try and hit the side, whereas the other one is trying to hold himself up here for a while, but he's got to run the risk of possibly getting charged in the side, and it looks like his cav did get charged in the side himself. But you can see the sheer number of dead from the Helmingers and the skirmish fire here. It's really kind of two armies of skirmishers against one right now until this ally comes to join them. So these guys are going to get peppered and hit pretty hard, just due to just the sheer number of arrows and how they're outnumbered. As you can see, that the Kamul on the Rune side is constantly having to reform himself because he can't chase down or lock down these knights anymore as they come in now, and it looks like they're going to get a rear charge, probably strong on the spearmen, which are facing the wrong way. They do try to reform, but they're not fast enough, as you can see them start dropping, and that's about 20 killed in that one charge then. It wasn't even that big of a charge, with only from 24. So looks like Rohan is now going to go on the offensive. They're going to reform on this side, obviously seeing an opportunity to flank round, using their X-Men as heavy sort of impact shock infantry, which is really what they've taken. They're probably going to go for the vulnerable back lines, which are being harassed by cavalry, and I think they'll probably try and lock this infantry here. Again, whilst they still wait for this other runic force to come over and join them, because they're a little out of position, it's always going to be a bit of a 2-on-1 scenario, As you can see that Rune, with very little other options, because they're being hit so hard with the skirmish phase, is having to push themselves forward into melee, as Arnold repositions its seemingly endless number of melee infantry to face against Zack Almighty that's on the far side on the hillside, as it looks like he's getting a little bit closer to catapults to hitting his own units. He's going to have to reconsider that. More charges coming into the back line of Kamul. I think that this is going to falter soon if he can't find a way of just pushing through. He has made a gap here in the militia because they are just militia, but he's not exploiting it. He needs to come through. He needs to hit... Oh, God, he's losing Dragon Rough. He needs to come through this point here and silence these guys. Like, there's not that much of a crew left, especially here where they've almost seemingly abandoned it somewhere. There's some over here. There's some here. But he can get through this line, he can get in, he can stop them, but meanwhile he's taken a little bit too long, and the dismounted Royal Guard are going to do the charge after the Knights have come in, I think, on all sides, and just mop up what's left here. And the catapult really should stop firing, I think, because they're running the risk of hitting their ally of Rohan, which kind of is having no problem dominating the situation now. There's a little bit of bubble here where they're starting to battle a little back-to-back, but I think they're going to get overwhelmed and they're probably going to break without too much longer. And I think we're going to start seeing these guys get worn down. Now, the balance of power is still relatively similar. We're just going to have a look here. And in terms of numbers killed, they're still relatively close. But what I would say is that a lot of the deaths that they've been getting is from killing militia and bandits. And the value of those deaths, I think, are probably not comparable. But we can see now that Hunter has sort of engaged the big sort of long line now of Arnor, wrapping around it almost as well. As you can see, more and more infantry being submitted to try and make the most of the positioning that they've got. Really, I think it's an okay hit, but I think it missed its real source. If it could have got a little bit over, it would have done a lot better. What they need to do is try and use the numbers they've got to lock down the superior units they've got and then push through, as you can see here, that what Zack's doing to get into the Rangers. So these guys can't reposition themselves and reform because they're already locked into melee. And he's going to have to start sending reserves in. So you can see the battle-ready Dunedain having to be committed to support his ranged units. As he starts bringing up his catapult. Now, the good news, for at least in terms of the new boxes, he will be able to get some crossfire, trying to hit some of these sort of large blobbed areas, probably along here or along here with the Helmingers. But we'll see how they go as they still continue to get charged. Here, they've got down to 15 bodyguards, but they're still, you know, causing deep punishment. It's very expensive units as catapults coming in again. We see the first general of Rune fall relatively early. I think he was fighting over with the main blob, so he was committed into that battle with his elites. So one army of Rune, I think, almost completely wiped out here, just in their dying sort of moments. And I think they'll break now without their general. So you can see that they're starting to have problems. Large number of deaths, but really more gold, I think, than browns. Catapult now can reposition, as will most of these front lines. I think we'll see sort of Rohan's shock troops and the Marshals of the Red finish off what's left here. You can see them just holding there as they start swinging their axes. And they'll start sort of chopping these guys down with the support of the cheap bandits there just to keep them locked in. And now you can see the entire force repositioning itself now, moving over to take on this sort of final two armies. Again, still continuing to keep this sort of L-shaped formation they tried to build, although admittedly slightly less strong on this side. And I think probably Zack's the area where they need to try and win it if they're going to, and maybe do the catapult shots into here, which he is trying to do, and he gets a great hit here on the gatekeepers, which are a very valuable unit in terms of what will happen in the late game, as Rohan still continues with the knights to make the most of their cavalry supremacy, charging any unit they get an opportunity to. And I think if they get some rear charges, they're going to go for it. I think any unit really now is susceptible to charging, and I think the last of these bowmen that are still out and about, and this catapult will probably be chewed up relatively quickly, so we can say goodbye to them and not too much of the future, as the catapult shot just swings over the top of some of these heavy infantry, as more Dragon Wrath get committed into the fray now. We can see now that they are starting to move in, starting to avoid these little gaps that they've created, trying to push in to make the most of going for the ranged units, the more squishy targets. They do open themselves up to, I think, are still shooting and firing gatekeepers here that are probably going to start shooting these guys in the flank, although, and that will start whistling down these guys relatively quickly if they can't be held in melee formation. As catapult shots continue to fire in, trying to hit their mark but not making much of a dent, as we see another general of Ruin go. This is the last of sort of probably what was left of the cavalry, as Rohan kind of just takes a breather here with his units, trying to rest them up, I think. So now it's Arnor in the last remaining of the three peoples, which is mainly their ranged unit with the loss of their militia, start taking on these two armies, although admittedly I think Hunter is kind of down to his last legs as he starts getting rear charged now, and I think his catapult is now, his catapult is now gone. He's just got a minor number of sort of a couple of ranged units, so really Zach on top of the hillside is the last sort of stand. As we see here, they continue to try and push through these more superior sort of numbers they're facing with. Zach just not having much luck with his shots, although he does kill a couple of the artillery unit. I think he was hoping to hit some of this blob here and get a little bit more value out of his catapult. So you see here that the and actually the Brotherhood of the Axe take out looks like Arnold's general quite early on, relatively, considering how many units Arnold still has, but he has been holding the front line for some time, and most of his units are melee, so it could have been he just had to commit them to the fray. There goes the last of Rune's generals now, so Rune, I believe, is generalless with the units they've got left. As catapult shots starting to rain in, with the more accurate one sort of non-flaming. Dismounted Royal Guard now holding the line. I think they'll have no problem against these Dragon's Wrath. I think they'll probably poke these guys to death relatively quickly. And the Royal Guard now up against some heavy infantry again, supported by some axemen. So it's going to be a tough battle for them. You do see that he did move up some tribesmen, but I guess he's moved them back because of the threat of the cavalry that still exists here. He's trying to turn around to get a charge on, try and lock these guys down, but I think they're going to get a charge. Yeah, successfully in there, though they didn't seem to really have the lances down as much as you'd expect. And we can see them trying to fight and hold on, but he is wrapping around, trying to lock these guys in, but they can be slippery, and they probably will inch their way out of there slowly, but we'll see. He may just leave them in there for the prolonged melee, but I think he'll probably just kind of get these guys out just from the pace and power that they've got. Yeah, so they lose a couple, but make it through otherwise. You can see here the Shadow Guard now taking on the Marshals of the Red, so quite a good matchup between the two, but I think unfortunately that the Shadow Guard just too low in number to go up against the Marshals of the Red. I think they've just been fighting for too long and too hard. I think they'll probably lose that in the long run. So you can see them there with both of them with two great weapons charging one another and going to the fray. Brother of the Axe doing relatively well against the Spearmen. I think they'll probably win that fight. However, Rohan is now going to be able to use the more significant numbers that they have to push through. Balance of power is still relatively close. I'm quite shocked by that. I'm not quite sure what it's taking into account to make that as more catapult shots come in from this hillside position. In terms of kill ratio, you can see that actually the enemies have lost not as much more as I thought they would. Only 76 to 79, so it's certainly all to play for now as we continue pushing forward. As Rohan now starts setting up their catapult. It does look like Arnold's catapult has stopped firing, and I don't know if it's out of ammunition or not, but Rohan is using standard shock, trying to go for these skirmish-based troops, and he does have one Dragon's Wrath unit in waiting, because a good catapult hit comes in there, taking out sort of relatively good number of keepers that look to be out of ammunition, and bandits, which I think will probably break relatively soon. Royal Lords continuing to charge around, continuing to make the most of their presence, and they're going to hit another squishy target of archers. Although don't really get a full charge off, I don't think. Not in the way they'd hoped. Possibly got trapped on this rock here, but they didn't get to push through. Axeman just waiting. I guess because they're exhausted. He's just thinking about what he wants to do. I think he probably wants to charge into into there, but maybe he's concerned about the Dragon's Wrath as he gets the Horse Lords now charge through with the Royal Guard to go for the last remnants of that catapult, and that is that catapult out of action with one just broken man left. Still those Knights of Inunas charging around. It's going to be very difficult now, I think, for the forces of Rune. I think that they're probably going to find that there's just too much facing them. Although having said that, if this is what's left of the alliance of the sort of good units, there isn't as many left as I thought there would be. It does appear like the barrage of gold knights on this side did relatively well against the men-at-arms, so we'll see how they start holding out as we zoom in now to see the Shield Maidens taking on, unfortunately, missile units. Admittedly, the Shield Maidens are missile units as well, but not in the same way. They're axe throwers, really. They should be able to clean these guys up relatively quickly. Although they do seem to be pulling away from that battle. I don't know what they've repositioned themselves against. It does look like there's a few of these heavy infantry now in their back line, supported by the Brotherhood of the Axe. Not entirely sure where they've come from, but Rohan's archery does need to probably change where its artillery shooting is. It does seem to be possibly risking hitting their own units, as the Gatekeeper's now getting swamped up by Zach Almighty now, who's been able to sort of work around the forces here with his sort of units. Locking down again infantry forces against his own while he goes for easier targets. Looks like Arno doesn't really have any units left as the cavalry continues to charge from Rohan and the Free Peoples. Really, it's now a batter into the centre. As the catapult got a good hit there on the Brotherhood of the Axe just before the charge comes in as well to support them, which is really good. Like, it could have almost saved the day, I think, getting some nice kills for almost nothing. And quite rightly, the cavalry is withdrawing from the melee. Doesn't want to be in prolonged melee with the axemen, as the dismounted Royal Guard mop up some of these nomadic axemen as a Shadow Guard unit comes in to support. Does look like there's a little bit of skirmishes left. Those 16 archers we saw before are still here. They do still exist. They are firing in. They did fire a couple of fire arrows, but I think that they're probably going to go back to standard shot as they reposition themselves there with the flags on their backs. So, don't know how many kills these guys are going to get together, but it is interesting to see that they are still going. They haven't been taken out by the cavalry just yet, and they do still have ammunition as they shot into the back of these guys. Missile unit now has silenced the catapult force, so they're now going to flee from there. They've got to be careful though, they may get charged. Arnold does have some forces here, but doesn't seem to be repositioning. I don't know whether he's crashed out or whether there's an issue there, but it's his forces. Are finding some Clan crossbow units which look like to be out of ammunition. So they are defending themselves, so they do still exist. It's not a desync, but I think maybe there's a problem. Possibly the player's AFK or he's not present. But the Shield Maidens have mopped them up anyway, and there wasn't really much of a force there. As Rules moves his Gatekeepers over, which I believe probably are out of ammunition now, with their axes over. So you can see them there with these big, giant, long glaives. As we see, the catapult unit quite rightly routing from being under assault. And the Dragon Raft taking on some Dunedain Rangers also routing. So we're seeing a lot of routing now coming from Forces of Arnold. Now they did lose their general in the front lines. And Rules is starting now to run out of cavalry. He has been charging them almost solidly now, but they are having to now charge heavy infantry as that's all really what's left. As the easier targets are starting to run out. He does still have some tribesmen, which do have some ammunition, which are now going to throw into the back of the men-at-arms, which still aren't moving. So I think almost certainly there's been a slight problem for Thompson here. Although I'm surprised they haven't been charged by cavalry, although having said that, just as I say that, the forces of armor do get a charge on, but it's not the most significant. There is only 2 of these guys left. They are starting to run low, charging into these missile units that do still have arrows. Making a relatively good charge there, taking out a good number. Is to continue on to power through, not wanting to be trapped off by the heavy infantry, it would appear. So just dribs and drabs now of cav. The main sort of infantry defense that they have left for the sort of Free Peoples does appear to be sort of here. This is the last stand, I guess. It does look like it's going to come down a lot closer than I thought it would. But the gatekeepers do still have ammunition. You can see they're getting a nice side shot into the Dragon's Wrath unit before they get to charge in. Charging in hard now into the men-at-arms, dropping them down because they're just a better unit and they're healthy with 50. And you can see that the Battle Ready Dunedain's still there with 9 of them. They're going to go for a rear charge. I wonder how many more dribs and drabs they've got really for units they can keep sort of submitted into this fight. However, the balance of power is starting to shift now. You can see that 98% of the allies, which is the Free Peoples, have died, whereas Runes still have 4% left. So it's 2% versus 4% with Rune with sort of a strong melee force. It seems almost to be a bit of a turnaround of the century. I'm surprised how many units Zack must have killed to be able to get to the position he is now, especially after the devastation of losing almost an entire army within the first sort of few minutes. As you can see, the crossbow unit's still existing here, so as much as they had the cav dominance and they did start charging heavy infantry units, they weren't able to clear out his ranged forces, and I think that's what's going to cause the problem. These guys still firing in, still being able to puncture armor with their armor-piercing force, and that's the Shield Maidens down to 2. The cavalry maybe lost a few too many units a little cheaply, I guess. Yeah, so I think they're going to get shot down before they can do much more. As we see it from the perspective of, again, these guys, which are were kind of standing out in the open, really. They were kind of baiting to be charged by cav, but the cav was used elsewhere. Whether that was more effective, we'll see by the end of the battle as one gets shot on his way for the charge, but he does get an okay charge in there, takes out a few of them. Now they do run the risk of breaking. They have lost their generals and all of Rune's forces. As you can see, the crossbowmen getting charged in the back, but no, it did better than I thought it would. The banner carrier did take out 2 of them, as they sort of continue to load up to try and get a shot off. Doesn't look like any of the one Shield Maiden remains, I think, unless she's bugged out. Nope. No Shield Maidens remain. They took them out. So it's really now just cav versus infantry. Now, what Zack's going to have to do, I guess, is almost square himself up, get what he has remaining, and almost use the new buck tactics against the cav. Form square, get his crossbowmen inside, and then fire. Although they are starting to break, so 12 crossbow units breaking. That's a shame. They could have been really useful against this heavy infantry. Sorry, not heavy infantry, heavy cavalry, as he brings more and more as his sort of broken remnants over and whatever's left of them. Although the bodyguard is trying to harass them on their way to this main force. But I don't think they're going to get any of them before they get there. So we're just going to start speeding this up to double speed now. I suspect that these missile units out here, these 5, they're going to break or get killed relatively quickly. As again, more and more of the remnants of the heavy infantry kind of form up here to create this sort of Napoleonic square, and whatever's left outside is trying to be mopped up. There is some archer fire coming in, so here you go. We've got some keepers here, still remaining 11 of them. Now this could, it depends how much ammunition they've got, but that could really cause problems for Zack's strategy. So I don't know if Zack realized that he still had these guys on the field, and depending on how much ammunition they've got, they could win this if they just sit back and continue to fire and skirmish. But they are repositioning themselves. They probably realize now that there's no real threat of Rune being able to charge them, so he's going to probably try and get into a better position and a better angle to fire, as the last of Rune's archers are sort of killed off and chased off of the field. So it's now going to be a fight between cavalry and crossbows versus heavy infantry. But how much ammunition do these guys have? They've been fighting seemingly since the start of the battle, so they can't really have too much left. But we'll see what happens. What he really needs to do is, I guess, almost wait it out as we come down now to 100% seemingly of allies killed to 98. But I don't think that it can be 100%. So as we do see a charge coming from the Royal Guard, and kind of they had to do that really. It's either that or start trying to kite with the keepers if they don't want to get charged down. Rune has now started to charge off after cavalry units, but I don't think that's going to pay off for them. I don't think they're going to catch them. But it does look like maybe it was a feint to keep the Free Peoples from moving. He has now realised, but it's a little too late. And actually, I think Rules has been caught out there. I think he didn't realise that they were going to get charged, or he just wasn't fast enough because he was trying to move something else out of the way. And we now start seeing the beginning of the end. Rohan's general fallen. The last remnants of the archers, the crossbows fallen. And now Rune just has to wait and wait for those cav charges to come in. There's very little the attackers of Rohan and Arnold can do now. You can see there he tried to do a feint, I guess, to try and force the counter charge to open up the flank, but it didn't work out in the way he'd hoped. But you got to try something. Looks like two catapult crew chasing after one heavy cav. I guess he might as well. And we're just going to speed that up here as we now look at the face from Rohan's point of view. And the Shadow Guard have actually gone into ambush facing the other way, maybe hoping that he might do a rear charge, but he didn't. He gone for a frontal charge. Just getting mopped up now. And there we have it. So that's the end of the battle. From the start that we had, I certainly wouldn't have predicted that as being the end result, but it's certainly interesting as how it turned out. And looking at the battle, relatively even kills. So you can see here the two armies that had sort of strong cavalry, which was Rohan and the Free Peoples, getting 1,300 kills each. Arnold, which was mainly the frontline troops, sort of slightly less, but he didn't really have much in the way of skirmish force. If you remember, he didn't have the most archers in the world. He was really kind of holding the line. Over the other side, even though he got wiped out relatively quickly, Kemel, he did get a large number of kills, but again, how many of those were bandits? Those are sort of 300 sort of force units in themselves and relatively easy to kill. You can see Zach there getting close to 1,300. So actually relatively even between these guys. Ultimately, I thought we'd probably see Zach with more kills, but seemingly not. As we look here, it rules his kills, so most of them came from sort of his cav units, as you can see here. Knights 264, bodyguards 252, the knights 123. But his gatekeepers did relatively well too, except for one unit that got 45. Obviously got chased down a little bit early. 129, 93, 91. I mean, those are good numbers for a skirmish force. As we scroll down now to see if there's anything else interesting. But already doing okay. One unit only getting 57 though for their value. We'll hope that they get more than that, especially with the no cav threat. So it looks like they just had issues towards the end of the battle. But thank you everyone for watching. Please feel free to submit videos and replays to us. The email address should be in the description below. A reminder that if you do join us on Twitch, you are still applicable to join us for the free prize draw. If you do any feedback, comments, please do so. We are getting closer and closer every day now to releasing 0.9, and we'd hope that the community will be ready to join us in that. It looks to be really fantastic. A lot of changes. It'll almost be like playing the mod again for the first time. It'll be so different and yet so familiar. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.